Hello and welcome to Two Car Pros. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to replace your upper and lower radiator hoses on a 2008 Dodge Caravan 3.3 liter V6. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is check and make sure the engine is nice and cool. We can do that by grabbing the upper radiator hose and squeezing it. If it feels like it's under pressure or you can't squeeze it, that means the system is under pressure and it's hot. And if you open the radiator cap underneath pressure, it will geyser in your face and burn you. So make sure this has plenty of give, like this does. See how easy it is to squish it? Yeah. That means it's not under pressure and we can open up the radiator cap. So here is the radiator cap. We can go ahead and remove this because we know the system is not under pressure. And now we can move on. Okay, so right here is the drain port or petcock. It is on the right side, right lower side of the radiator if you're looking straight at the vehicle, or on the lower left side of the vehicle if you're underneath it. It is on the opposite side of the lower radiator hose. So we need to loosen that, and out of this spout right there, the coolant's gonna come, and if you remove this entirely, the coolant will just come out of both holes. So to regulate flow, we're gonna loosen it and let it flow out of the spout. Now, unfortunately, it looks like the spout leads into this kind of undersection. It kind of looks like a frame. It's like a subframe. And it has holes in it too, so just get a bucket ready because the coolant is coming. I eventually just got frustrated with how long it was taking holding the bucket, so I took the petcock out completely. As you can see, the flow is much better. Also be mindful of where you put coolant. It is slightly sweet to the taste, and animals like to drink it. So be really, really careful where you store it. Not around animals, dogs, cats, that kind of thing. Because it is poisonous, animals like to drink it. Once all the coolant has drained out, or as much as you're gonna get, slows down to a dribble, or just a couple of drops, excuse me. You can reinstall the petcock by hand. And then what I will do is take a standard screwdriver and just twist it a little bit more, not a lot. It's made of plastic, it's brittle, it's fragile, it will crack. And if it's not in good shape and looks cracked, replace it. Other than that, we can move on. Okay, so the next thing we can do is remove the hose clamp, or at least loosen it, on the engine side of the lower radiator hose. Now, I'm doing this because there is fluid left in here, and if I move the radiator side first, it's going to dribble out all over the subframe, so it's going to be a lot easier to catch the residual fluid if we do this side first. This is an 8mm on here, so you can use a standard screwdriver if you want. Obviously, we're going to be loosening this hose clamp here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you don't need to actually physically remove it like I just did. You can just loosen it and kind of walk it backwards. Mine just came out that way because the screw came out first, which is weird. This must be a really old, probably the original hose clamp. So now we can get our bucket ready and prepare for trying to contain all this. It's gonna get messy. There we go. See the need for the bucket? And we can just let that drain out. That actually wasn't so messy. That wasn't so bad. But you definitely need a bucket or catch basin. So while we're here, I'm going to clean off these mating surfaces. You know, the rubber kind of gets vulcanized to this metal fitting here. So we want to make that as clean as possible. I might even get some carburetor spray. I got some carburetor spray on the end of this rag, and I'm just going to clean its surface real well. Okay, now we can move to the top hose. So once that hose clamp up there is loose enough, we can remove the lower radiator hose entirely. Like that. So the next thing we want to do is compare our old low radiator hose to our new one to make sure that they're identical. The part I'm using today is an AC Delco, I guess it's a 22643M. I will leave a link in the description below to this exact part, so you can just order it. Now the next thing we want to do is replace the hose clamps from the old hardware to the new one. Now these hose clamps are the screw-in type, which a lot of people prefer to the snapping type, but here's the disadvantage to these. As rubber gets hot and cold, it kind of shrinks and mushrooms out. So the spring type always constantly clamps, always, always, always. It never wants to not unclamp. That's why they're hard to get off and on, but they always come down. The problem with these is you put them on, great, they're easy, here you go, but in a couple days, you're gonna have to retighten these again, and if it starts leaking, you have to do it again. So you do have to come back and redo a lot of your own work, but some people prefer these because they're a little bit simpler. I have a whole video on how to use snap ring pliers. Well, they're not snap ring pliers specifically. They're hose clamp, spring hose clamp pliers. They're up in the card right now if you want to check that video out. That was super, super cool. So we need to take the old hose clamps and put them on the new hardware, like that. I mean, you can even just leave them super loose and then get them on to the fitting later. That's what I like doing. Or you can just leave them apart like this and put them on later, but I like to kind of preload everything. Less work for me in the future. I'm okay with that. Well, now that we have this and we make sure our parts are identical, which they are, we are all good, we can reinstall this. And before I forget, we want to clean the fitting on the radiator itself real well. Again, so we have good fitment and no leaks. There we go, that's looking good. And now we can replace the lower radiator hose. And it might be a little hard going, trying to get it on, because this is brand new rubber. It's not exactly flexible, but if you just keep working it, it gets to where it needs to go. And now we can put this side on. This side was much easier. Now, when you're putting the hose clamps back on, you want to make sure the hose clamp is behind where the barb is. And you can tell where the barb is by squeezing it. It should be the thickest part. And you want the hose clamp to be behind that. That's where the barb is. Then we can tighten these. So now that that's nice and tight and behind the barb itself, so we're not going to get any leaks. Like I said, because these are not the spring type, they're the screw-in type, we're going to have to come back here after a couple days of driving around, make sure they're not leaking, and tighten them again. As far as the torque spec goes, I don't really know if you would torque these. I know someone is going to ask, because that's what everybody asks for, but this time is just kind of reasonably tight. You notice I'm using a very small ratchet, and I'm not trying to Hercules these hose clamps on there. So now we can move to the upper one. Once again, make sure your hose clamp is behind the barb on the fitting while you're tightening. Okay, so next I'm going to take off the hose clamp that goes into the thermostat housing. In order to do that easier so you guys can see, I'm going to unplug these plug wires, which you don't need to do, but I'm going to do for you. And if you do the same, the order is 2, 4, 6, like it says here, and they just pull off. And it's still 8 millimeters for the bolt size on the hose clamp. So I'm going to go ahead and put a rag there. This might be just a teeny bit left in the thermostat housing. Yeah, that's what I thought. There's even a little bit left in this upper radiator hose. So now we can do the radiator side. Now now we can walk the upper radiator hose off like that. Now I'm going to wipe off the mating surface on the thermostat housing, so it's nice and clean when we reinstall the hose. Next, we want to compare our old upper radiator hose to our new one. Just make sure it's identical, which it is. This is an AC Delco 24648L. I will leave a link in the description down below to this exact hose, so you can just order it. And then we need to transfer the hose clamps from here to here. And replace it. Now the new upper radiator hose is ready to go in the car. And now we can replace the upper radiator hose. And we can tighten up the hose clamps. And again, you want the hose clamp to be behind the barb. You can even see it kind of sticking out right there. It's really easy to feel, like if you just run your finger over it, and you want it to be just behind the barb. And again, in a few days, we're going to have to come back and check this and make sure it's still tight. Same goes for this one. All the hose clamps. There we go, just behind the barb. That looks great. And now we can put the spark plug wires back on. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is place a funnel. No, you do not need this funnel. This is kind of a cool funnel I found on Amazon that would make my life a little easier. I will link to it down below if you want it. It's only $12 and it's made my life a whole heck of a lot easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a coolant until it fills up to here. Because obviously there's galleries in the engine as the thermostat opens up is going to fill and the level is going to drop. So we're going to keep adding it until it's filled up the radiator completely and the thermostat's open and it's nice and warm. So let's get the coolant. The coolant I'm using today is Walmart SuperTech pre-diluted 50/50 ready to rock. It doesn't need anything super specific or super crazy. This engine doesn't get super hot and this is going to be good for many, many miles. You can always kind of judge how much coolant you're going to need by how much coolant you removed. And we removed about a fifth of a big bucket's worth. So you can kind of judge it off of that. You can even, if you have a couple of these lying around, you can fill them up with your refuse coolant to see how much you have or how much you need. Now, make sure you take your refuse coolant to an EPA approved facility for correct disposal. Do not just dump it down the drain. Now the reason I really like this funnel is you can kind of put as much as you want in, and even if it ends up being too much, it comes with a cork and then you can remove this and put it back in the container. I really like this funnel. I can't stress it enough. If it ever broke, I'd need to buy another one. And if they stopped making them, I'd be heartbroken. I very much enjoy this funnel. And when you're filling your car with any kind of fluid, it's a good idea to look underneath it to make sure it's not just dumping out onto the ground. You would not believe how often that actually happens to people. And that's okay. So we look down in there, yep, there's still a lot more room to go. So, time for the second gallon. Okay. So now that it's done kind of blooping up, the air is basically being forced out of the system. What we need to do next is start it and let it run for quite a while until the engine gets warm. Then that thermostat is going to open up and allow more coolant to go inside the engine in different coolant passageways. And this might drop, or don't be alarmed if this raises, because the air inside the engine gets hot and expands and it pushes the coolant out of the way until it kind of blurps up, and then the coolant will take the air's place. So if this level does rise, don't panic, unless it's going to overflow obviously, then maybe cap it off and take it away and try to empty some out. But this is a good place to be. So let's go ahead and start the engine, let it warm up. Okay, so now that we have let the engine run for quite some time, all of the coolant galleries have been filled out, which is good. And now we can remove our funnel. And now we just put it right back in the container. That's nice. And again, my funnel solution is optional. You can just use a regular funnel if you want. So now you see down in there, you can see that there's coolant right there, which is what you want. Now here's another cool tech tip for you. While you're here, go ahead and replace the radiator cap with a new one. It's just a good idea to replace your radiator cap frequently, because if this can't regulate pressure, no matter what you do, you will overheat. So just get a new radiator cap. They're a couple dollars and they will save you from a roadside headache. Make sure this is on nice and tight, which it is, and we can move on to the reservoir tank now. Now, the reservoir tank is insanely hard to see from the camera, but it's pretty easy in person. Way down here is where it says minimum, and up here is where it says maximum. So you kind of want to be somewhere in the middle there. This part isn't actually super critical, but we're going to fill it to we're somewhere in the middle between minimum and maximum. Now, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but the level I put it at is right about there, right at the end of my fingertip there. And that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it there because I want it to have a little bit of leeway when it comes to pressure building up. Because if you fill it up too much, it's just going to go out here on this spout and spray all over everything. So I'm going to give it a little bit of leeway room. And then of course, we're going to put the cap back on. And we put the cap back on for the reservoir. Here we go. All fixed. That's how to replace your upper and lower radiator hoses on your 2008 Dodge Caravan with a 3.3 liter V6. Thank you so much for watching. All applicable links are down below in the description, and I'll catch you next time.